Well, hello, and welcome to the Wine Access Unfiltered podcast. You guys, I did something I never thought I would do. I went on a cruise. I went on a National Geographic cruise, and I had the best time. It was down the Columbia and Snake Rivers, all through the Pacific Northwest. And I have to tell you, it was sort of a revelatory experience for me because I learned so much beyond just wine. We got out into the surrounding areas. We hiked. We were on the rivers. We were birding. I was doing all these things that I've never done. I'm not an outdoorsy kind of girl, if you haven't gathered that from the podcast yet. But we did this really cool thing, and I learned a lot from it. And I thought maybe it was high time that we just sort of hone in on the Pacific Northwest, which is admittedly a broad category. We have done specifics on Washington, we've done specifics on Oregon, but I thought like a macro lens of the two would be kind of fun. And it was also an excuse to sit down with my guest today, who I really love, and I think you guys are going to really love as well, Samantha Cole-Johnson. She is the senior editor, US for JancesRobinson.com. She's got her WSET diploma. She's got all these awards and accolades, and you've probably seen her on Instagram a time or two if you were interested in all things wine news, because she does the Wine News in 5, which is such a great little way to get the weekly wine news via Instagram or on JancesRobinson.com, where you can find the whole darn thing. But we met actually because she also does some of the social for Jancis Robinson. So we actually finally got to interact on a longer term basis earlier this year at Unified. And I'm very excited to sit down with her today. So please welcome to the show, Samantha Cole-Johnson. Hi.
Hey, thank you. That was Unified was great. I really appreciated your tips on ManyChat because that is an excellent app.
Yes.
And also, we do the Wine News in 5 as a podcast as well.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. No, please plug away. That's a great point. Is it longer or is it the same length?
Same length. It's just the way that I originally envisioned it was that people would listen to it in the car on their way to work on Monday morning, and get that little snippet.
So what has been happening on the wine news front? Anything interesting in the last few weeks?
Oh, man. Well, for a while there, it was just purely about tariffs.
Oh, that's right. The tariffs, the T word that now everybody's... I felt like for a minute it was like the wine industry was real scared because it was the 200% and then it dropped, but it went real broad. And now it's tariffs everything.
So tariffs everything, 10% everywhere. Yeah, I think what happened was that when it was 200%, it was incredibly scary and it would have put people out of business immediately. And then the differing tariffs. So for South Africa, for a minute, it was 30%.
Right.
And that was scary. And then now it's settled at pretty much 10% across the board, except for China, which has its own host of things that are not great, but is not quite as much of an issue for the wine industry.
Right.
But the fact that it's 10% on everything is still pretty bad. It just looks good in comparison.
Right.
To
it's not 200%, but it's also not awesome.
Yeah. And in terms of people who are running import companies, like that's incredibly difficult. And there was just a case. Do you know VOS Imports in New York?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So he actually is suing the Trump administration right now.
Oh, okay.
Because of the tariffs and its effect on small business. So that's interesting. That's news. I'm continuing to follow along with that. We'll see where it goes.
I assume it's difficult to follow along with because it does. I feel like it changed. Like every day, there's like a new piece of information that may or may not be relevant and or stick by the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. There always is. There's a lot that I don't cover on there just because there's not enough time. And if it's really regionally specific and it doesn't affect people in like a broad swath of people, then I'm probably not going to put it on because we have a global listenership.
Right.
So that's harder.
It is a global, I mean, even though it's, it's affecting the tariffs are affecting US, it does reach everyone globally. And it's beyond just the producers. Like I think we maybe touched on it briefly when the 200% tariff was being threatened, but like just to give a sort of overarching perspective on what's happening, like it's not just the producers in Europe, South Africa, South America, Australia, it's the importers, It's the restaurants, it's the distributors, it's all of these people that are part of a very large, very complicated ecosystem that in some regard are going to be affected.
Yeah, the tariffs definitely affect everyone globally. And so they have been featuring a lot in the wine news. But in terms of the people it was supposed to benefit, which are domestic producers, it doesn't, because they buy a lot of their equipment
Right.
and they definitely buy most of their barrels from France.
Yep. New French oak, anyone?
Mm-hmm. And tanks from anywhere, and
Corks
amphora
from
from
Portugal.
anywhere, and corks from Portugal or Spain. And so their costs just went up. And then also, if their distributor is impacted because their imports are impacted, then they might have to lay off people, and then domestic producers don't have as much representation, as many people going out in the market and sharing their wines. So kind of bad news all around.
Right. On top of an industry that's already been, not in the best of circumstances in terms of sales. And so, it's not great. It's not great news. We're doing our best, but
I did get sent a Economist article this morning by Jancis, and it was about how we just have so many people who are now choosing to abstain, and Gen Z
yes.
is choosing to abstain a lot of the time. And it's like, yeah, you'll have some health benefits, but people are getting less social, and they're like, people are having less success with finding partners, and there are all of these effects from people going completely dry. So that was a news article that I was like, yeah, The Economist, they always do a balanced. They always have a balanced take.
It's true though. I mean, it was the whole impetus for the Come Over October campaign that Karen McNeil had started. It's like, yes, there are health benefits that we should be looking at, or health consequences that we should be looking at. Sure. I think has always been the case with alcohol and the consumption of it, but are there pros to it? Of course. Is it the reason that I am able to be social at times? 100%. I am not the most, despite the fact that I host a podcast and have a very large social media presence, I am not the most socially savvy person. I'm very uncomfortable in social situations, and sometimes a glass of wine can really be that lubrication that I really need.
And it keeps you at the table longer. I
Yes,
feel
that's
like
true.
when you go out to dinner with friends, if the meal finishes and there's nothing to linger over, you don't linger.
That
You
is
leave.
so true. That is so true. Yeah, the best conversations usually happen at the end of the night, and it's usually over a lovely glass of wine, which once again, I'm not doing my job raising a glass and saying thank you and cheers, hello and welcome. I know it's early over on the West Coast where you're based, but we are drinking in the afternoon here on the East Coast a glorious Pinot Noir that is from one of the regions in question today. So if you're a part of the Podcast Wine Club, this is the Tior. I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's a German word, Tior. 2023 Oregon Pinot Noir from the Yamhill Carlton ABA, a really cool producer, female producer. Her parents have been in the industry since the 70s in Oregon. And just to me, a really classic example of Willamette Valley. Also a really fun label, which I always enjoy. A lot of color and like fun things on here. Did you know this wine prior to me sending it to you?
I had no idea. I hadn't heard of it. I know that they're only like 2 years old. But I actually hadn't even heard of her parents' winery. And so appreciate you sending it. This is very cool. And I agree. It's really classic. When you're looking at it, you're like, it is that pale ruby color. It smells earthy and red fruited. And you would have a really hard time calling this anything but Pinot Noir. And for Willamette Valley, I looked at price point too, and I was like, at $35, you're struggling to find very many things in the valley at this point that are that reasonable. So this is really nice.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you like it. This only sell about 11 months in 2-year-old French oak. So, it's very fresh, it's very clean, it's very vibrant. It's kind of showcasing, what Pinot Noir is, which is a light, lovely, fruity grape. Occasionally has a little bit of like spiciness to it, depending on how it's made, if there's a little whole cluster or if there's some oak on there or potentially coming from the terroir. But I really love Oregon Pinot Noir. I think obviously that grape has become synonymous with Oregon. Did you grow up in the region, or you just
No,
have become associated with the region to the point where I think that you've grown up there?
I claimed Oregon as my home
Okay,
when I
that's fine. I
was
think it claimed you back.
21.
Yeah, great. Well, then you've effectively you were born there. Then your rebirth.
I left Colorado, got to Oregon, and was like, this is home.
How similar are Colorado and Oregon though? Are there
I grew up all over the place, but I landed in Boulder, Colorado for high school and
okay?
college. And so I spent 8 years there. And I thought when I left, I was like, God, I really love Boulder. It's great here. It's athletic and outdoorsy, but I want to leave home.
Okay.
So where can I go that's similar? I was like, Portland seems like it has the same vibe.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not,
Really?
It's not the same.
I've never been to Boulder, but tell me why.
Portland is much grungier
Okay.
than Boulder or Denver.
Oh,
It is in a great way. I mean, we certainly have our issues right now.
Yeah.
But it's a great place. There are like funky movie theaters. Of course, it rains half the year. We get a gorgeous 5 to 6 months, but yeah, it's raining half the year. The first year, actually, I didn't get here and say immediately that it was home. The first year, I was like, oh my God, it's awful. I want to move home. I moved in like August or September, and then the rain started. It's like, oh man.
Oh,
This is
that was the opposite thing that happened to me in Napa Valley
it was
when I moved there.
it was a rough start. And then actually the last year that I went into accounting. I really hated my job.
Mm.
And I thought I'd go home. And then I found the wine world and the wine scene in Portland. And when I went and worked my first harvest after spending a bit of time in the restaurants, that was the last year that I ever thought I'd go home back to Colorado. That is, I was like, this is now home. I'm not leaving. These people raised me in the wine industry, and I'm staying here. I'll leave for little time periods, but I'm coming back.
So you were in Portland. You thought you were going to get into accounting, and then you got into the wine world. But how did you make that leap? Because that's not a natural leap.
No, so I fully went into accounting. I came from business school. Fully went into accounting.
You were there.
Absolutely hated it. Was in that position for 8 months, had worked in restaurants during college. And at 8 months into the accounting job was like, I can't. Turned around, went and interviewed with restaurants, started working on the floor again, grabbed the wine list and was like, I wonder how much I can learn about this. And started with the Court of Master Sommeliers program, and then went from there. I went to a different restaurant, learned more about wine, got certified with the court, switched over to the Wine and Spirits Education Trust, which is the WSET, and then went all the way through my diploma. And during my diploma, I thought education is my favorite thing, and I would really like to do this long term. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move back to Colorado and start an approved program providership. But before I leave, I should work a harvest. And then I worked a harvest, and then I was like, there's no way I'm going home.
And is that when you started the Diary of a Cellar Rat?
Yes, that was actually the first vintage. I did not. I just was there learning. And then the second vintage that I worked in Oregon was when I wrote the Diary of a Willamette Valley Cellar Rat. And it's
such a good blog.
I look back at that. And
it's evergreen.
It's pretty entertaining still. But I was a different writer. I was trying really hard to be funny, and I can see it in some of my articles. And it wasn't a bad thing. It was just Richard Hemming, who also writes for Jancis Robinson, was my inspiration for that. He'd done the same thing 11 years earlier, and that's how I pitched it. I was like, you haven't done this in 11 years. I want to do it.
So you land in Portland and start writing this blog for Jancis Robinson, who, by the way, is, not nobody. Like, this is, if you're going to start writing, like, this is the person you're going to start, like, this is the top of the mountain.
I tell people all the time that if I knew what I know now, I wouldn't have even asked because I wouldn't
Isn't
have.
that so true of your 20s though?
I was just like, what? I didn't even think about it. I was just
Yeah.
like, of course I could write this thing, even though I have no portfolio. I'm just going to go and ask her.
Yeah.
And thank goodness she said yes. But now I look back and I'm like, what? What were you thinking?
We could all benefit from being a little more delusional. I think, when people ask me, how do I get into the wine industry? What should I do? The first thing I say is like, well, you just got to figure out like, one, where you want to be, and two, like, what do you want to do? Like, what do you want your day to? You don't necessarily have to know exactly what job you want it to look like, but like, what do you want your day to day to look like? But I also like, there is this thing in the wine industry that I don't know if it exists in all industries, but like, you can get jobs that like you shouldn't be able to get very young and very inexperienced, and I don't know why that is. Like, I think back to me getting the job at Press, 10 years ago, and I'm like, on what planet do they think hiring this very inexperienced somm from New York who knew absolutely nothing about Napa Valley wines, on what planet did they think this was a good idea, like throwing me in the middle of that ocean and seeing if I swim? But I think there is a level of delusional that like, if you can parlay that into the wine industry, like you can pretty much do whatever you want here.
And people need good people who will work hard. It's so much more important that people work hard than that they have all the experience and the attitude. Oh man, I would so much rather work with someone who had a great attitude and no experience but wanted to learn than someone who was like all the experience in the world but really salty about the fact that this is an industry that doesn't compensate you well, especially at the beginning of your career.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. And I will say, after I got the job at Press, the next person that we hired after me, she was actually a hostess that was at the restaurant. She was going to the CIA. And she was really interested in wine. And we interviewed all these other people that had all these credentials. And at the end of the day, we went back to it and we were like, you know what? We know her. We like her. We know she's going to be a great worker. She's awesome with people. We know that we can interact well with her. And everything else is sort of a learned skill beyond that. And I'm happy to teach. And I think that's what this industry is all about, is this idea of mentorship and leadership. And just like, the wine world is so evolving as well, as you know, from working harvest and living in a wine region. Like, it never really stays the same. And so mentorship is such a big part of being in the wine world, is knowing that you're never going to know it all, and being with someone who can educate you and sort of guide you through vintages and seasons. And you just spent how long, a week in Napa Valley critiquing a vintage 260 wines, you told me? Like, that's not something you can learn in a book.
No, it definitely isn't. But going back to this for a second, I just want to say that I have a whole team. I'm the youngest person on my team by quite a few years, and it has been so important to have that, like, them guiding me. But also, the wine industry needs to hire more young people because I can help them too. I'm like, I took over social media within a week of getting here, and I didn't know much. I just figured it out.
Yeah.
And I think it just makes more sense to you if you've grown up with it and you're of the mindset that this is going to be part of your life going forward. It's just, we're how old? I'm in my 30s now, and I'm like, I have a long career ahead of me. I'm going to have to know how to work these things.
So much of what you do is education, and I know it's a passion of yours. And I know this episode is going to focus eventually on the Pacific Northwest and these wine regions. And people, I promise you will get some value out of this episode. But, getting off onto this tangent about education and about being in the wine industry and finding different ways to get into it. Somebody messaged me the other day, and she was so excited because she was like, I just signed up for the Napa Valley Wine Academy. And I was like, amazing. But like, please, I'm so excited for you. Please remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. This is not going to happen in a day. It's not going to happen in a week. This is a lifelong journey, and you need to be okay with that. Like, I think the sooner you come to terms with the fact that you're not going to know everything ever, and you're certainly not going to know it all at once. Like, you're going to feel like you know a lot after a class. the sooner you come to terms with that, the better off you're going to be. And I think the point of this little tangent is like, surround yourself with people who can teach you and know that you're not going to know everything.
And do accept that it will be, as long as you love it, it will be a forever process. I just had to accept that. And I took a kind of an ego hit because I'm in the Master of Wine program.
Mm-hmm.
And I got through the first stage and I'm in the second stage. And I failed the tasting exam and I have to retake it.
Mm-hmm.
And I deferred it. I won't take it till next year. I was supposed to take it a month. And it is really important to remember that you have time. It is a lifelong pursuit and you just need to stick with it and you need to do things that balance your life. So
totally. Yeah. No, it's so true. I still get asked what level Somm are you, which is maybe my least favorite question in the world to get asked. Getting a pin or getting a diploma has never been the end goal. The end goal was, can I competently sit at a bar and not feel like an asshole ordering a glass of champagne and knowing exactly what to order with it? Like that really was the end goal to me. And if I can feel that, and I can feel that every day, and I can go out and I can explore new things, like to me, I've succeeded. And I impart a little wisdom maybe along the way, but if that is your journey, like that's awesome. I think that's so great. And just know that, like, to your point, like you're a very smart person. Like you aced your first part of this. Like you failed your tasting exam. Like that's okay too. We have bad days. Yeah.
And your success is actually more contingent upon the fact that you are really good at getting up and dusting yourself off and continuing to go. Because you're going to fail so many times if you try.
Exactly. It's, it's this, we're just out here drinking wine also at the end of the day. Like it's just grape juice, you guys. It's not serious.
It's true. It feels really serious sometimes, but it's not
really serious. Yeah. Let's talk about Oregon a little bit, because obviously Pinot Noir is the grape that people associate with Oregon, but it is not the only grape by any means. And we certainly, on this cruise, we tasted lots of different varieties outside of Pinot Noir. In fact, when I was up there a few years ago, the Chardonnay and the sparkling that was being made from Chardonnay were like my two big, that was amazing, super cool. But we're also seeing like a ton of Gamay, a little bit of Aligoté. You're seeing some Gamay up in some of the other parts. But like, what do you think are some of the lesser known varieties, or the varieties that people just sort of sleep on when they think of Oregon?
I do think that, not lesser known, but oh man, Oregon Chardonnay gives Pinot a run for its money.
It sure does.
I actually think that we are better suited to be growing white varieties, but that's
a hot take.
That is a hot take. That would be disputed by many.
I know, and I don't disagree with you, but I know winemakers up until a few years ago, they were like yanking their vines up left and right. So why do you think that Chardonnay is the king of Oregon?
I just think we have a beautiful summer, but we don't have the longest season. Like it's going to start raining in the fall, and where you can, like, that affects your red tannin quality if you don't get enough time.
So true.
It doesn't affect any, like, you don't have the tannin quality is not a worry in white wine.
Right.
So if you don't get enough time for Chardonnay, it'll be zestier and brighter. I guess it's not enough time, but if you get less time for Chardonnay, it'll be zestier and brighter, but it's not going to feel like something's missing.
Right. It's like a suffer in the way that Pinot would suffer.
And it's getting warmer everywhere. So I think that Pinot obviously does great here. We make great Pinot Noir. We'll probably at some point be able to grow some other red grape varieties that do well as Gamay and Pinot Noir. But I'm in love with the whites here. I love Chardonnay. I love the little bit of Aligoté. There are, what other ones? I tried a Chenin. That was really good a couple of years ago. Oh, Albarino.
Yeah.
This is a personal plug. I can't review his wines because we're really good friends, but I have a friend, his name is John Soares, and his really good friend, Andrew Rikers, who I worked with for a little bit, and is a wonderful, wonderful winemaker. They have a project together called Sacred Shores, and they make Albarino and Sangiovese, and they're both so
Whoa.
good. So
That is a very interesting combination.
yeah.
Why Sangiovese?
I think just because they
They just
both
love their
love
Chianti
Sangiovese,
or Brunello or
and they also really love this vineyard called 3 Mile Vineyard,
okay.
and they wanted to source fruit from there, and what they had at that time was Sangiovese, so they took it.
Mm, I think that's awesome. I think that I mean, obviously we're speaking about Willamette Valley, which is just a pocket of Oregon. There are really great wine regions in Southern Oregon, which we should maybe touch on for a minute. Um, but I think it's so interesting that people, even though they associate Oregon with Pinot and potentially now Chardonnay, it is much more of a Wild West than people realize. And I think it's also in part what makes Oregon so exciting. As you kind of make your way a little farther north to Washington, to that border, so Walla Walla, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, it splits between Oregon and Washington, and you've got like Hood River right there, which there's some really cool things happening. You also start to get into very interesting territory up there, and you start moving out of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and into these bigger red varieties like Syrah, Grenache to an extent, Cabernet, Merlot. Do you make your way over there? I mean, it's a bit of a hike from Portland.
It's a bit of a hike. I definitely go
Yeah.
up there. I'm going up there in July for the Blood of Gods
Oh, what is
event.
that?
It combines metal music and wine, so I'm gonna go speak at that. Um,
What?
but I'm not a huge metal music fan. But Stacy, who runs the event, was like, "Hey, come up and sit on the panel." And I was like, "Stacy, I don't know anything about metal." And he's like, "It's okay. We've got other people who know about metal, and you know about wine." So I'm going up to Walla Walla for that. But
Okay.
I also go up there quite frequently, and I think it's amazing to do the drive from Portland, where you're talking about in the winter, it's quite rainy,
Hmm.
and it's cool.
In
And then,
Portland, it's quite rainy.
yes.
Yes.
Um, and so then you start to go up and you get to the gorge and you're driving over um, towards the east. And as you go through the Columbia Gorge, it just gets drier and drier and drier. So
Hmm.
that's its own AVA, but the rainfall on one side versus the other is completely different, and what they
Yeah.
grow is completely different. And by the time you get to Walla Walla, like you said, you have all of those robust grape varieties, and you've got Rhone varieties, and you've got Bordeaux varieties, and it's dry because you have the rain shadow effect from the Cascade Range. Um, and you definitely, well, there's like 2 people trying to dry farm, but most people are very reliant on irrigation.
It's always the most surprising thing. It was the most surprising thing for me when I first visited Eastern Washington a few years ago. I grew up thinking of Washington as Seattle, which is obviously more in line with Portland and its weather habits. But Eastern Washington, because as you mentioned, of the Cascades and the rain shadow effect, is quite dry, like less than 10 inches of rain a year. And it looks a little like there's lots of wheat fields, and it's a very interesting terrain there that doesn't really look like it looks like the Midwest. It doesn't look like what you think of when you think of Washington. And it's so interesting to me, beyond the fact that, you know, this is I didn't imagine this place to be what it was. And even my sister was like, wait, like why is it so dry here? It's also interesting that we sort of have lumped Washington and Oregon into one thing when they really couldn't be more different, like almost in the way that we've lumped in a less worse way Napa and Sonoma together, and they also could be more different. Like, how do you think that we've done the Pacific Northwest and those two regions a huge disservice by just claiming them as one particular thing? Like, you're squinting right now, like,
I do, but I also understand from a logistical perspective why it was done.
hmm.
Um, I don't think that this was at all done because the regions make similar wines. They
No,
don't. It's because if you are a publication who's looking at reviewing these areas, you're like, okay, so we've got a reviewer in California. Maybe if we have a big staff. We have more than one reviewer in California, but California is putting out 80%, might be more, might be less, but around 80% of the US's wine.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're roping together Washington, Oregon, New York, Virginia,
right,
and everyone else, you've got like 20%. So
right.
logistically, with clumping things, you're like, well, we'll send someone to do both. And I get that part. But yes, the wines themselves, no, you would be better off doing Sonoma Coast with Oregon and Napa with
Right.
Walla Walla.
With Walla Walla. Yes, exactly. No, that's such a good point. I think, yeah, if you're listening and you're like, I'm trying to get a sense, like if Oregon and Sonoma are more closely aligned with each other, Napa and Walla Walla are more closely aligned with each other in terms of what they're producing. Certainly different in terms of like styles that they're producing, prices of what they're producing. What do you think is exciting in Washington? Oh, by the way, I was very excited because I finally got to see the Rocks District. I didn't get to see that on my last trip, which was like mind blown, super cool. You hear about these huge like pudding stones like you would see in the Rhone Valley. And it's so true. Like you're driving by and it's, you go through Walla Walla, which is a super cute little town that you should definitely stay and spend some time in. Then you're driving out to the Rocks District and you see like Christophe Baron's vineyards. And all of a sudden it's just like, it's rocks everywhere. Like these huge, giant, like rocks. And that's what they farm. Like that's what these vines grow out of. That's like what people tend to. It's wild. There's no grass. There's no dirt. It's rocks.
It is crazy that people chose to put vines in there. And I think that it is, in terms of what I'm excited about, a lot of the wines are from the Rocks District. And it's more because whether or not you love or hate those wines, because they are very distinctive.
They are very
and I'll
distinctive.
Talk about why in just a second. But whether you love them or hate them, you have to recognize how distinctive they are. And if you love wine and you love that sense of place, it really draws you in because you're like, this couldn't be from anywhere else. I've never tasted something like this.
It is one of the I think it's one of the most distinct regions in the US, maybe in the world.
But that flavor profile, to me, it's almost salty and it's really savory.
Yes.
And part of that is because the soils there are so is it high pH? I think that they are very acidic. So lower pH. And it's because Washington is such an agricultural region. And so that even though it's crazy to farm rocks, people did have orchards there. And so the soils have been fertilized for a while. And now people are going more towards not farming as intensively, but they become fairly acidic. And one of the results is that when your vine is uptaking all of its nutrients, it can't access certain things. And the end result, I don't know all of the chemistry in this, but is that your fruit is pretty high pH. So it's more basic, less acidic. And it creates this like salty tang to the acidity that is not something that I would say I've found in other wines. And like it's almost like a pork rub. It's like very savory.
I describe it as like a charcuterie board. It's like if you took a handful of salami and black olives and shoved them in your mouth with like a raspberry, that's what it tastes like.
Yes.
I mean, it's like, it's this savory, salty, umami. And we're talking about the red wines, right? We're talking about Grenache, we're talking about Syrah. And if you ever tasted any of Christophe Baron, like Cayuse or Bionic Frog or Horsepower, like those wines are incredible. Like they just embody this idea. I mean, a lot of wines in that region do, but I think his maybe more so than others. They just embody it. And my sister, I was with her on this cruise and so we were tasting these wines and we tasted with Christophe. And she was like, why? Like, what am I tasting here? And I was like, it's a charcuterie board. Like, this is what like Syrah at, in this particular place it's what it tastes like. It can taste like this in a tiny little fractionalized amount in some places in California and in the Rhone and other places where Syrah is grown. But very specifically in the Rocks District, it is this like sort of bloody, iron-rich, salty, olivey charcuterie board of a wine that people either love or they really hate. And if you're sitting here thinking like, ooh, that's interesting, go find yourself a bottle of something and taste it because it is really, really cool to taste.
I do think that what you said about Christoph's wines showing it more, I think that that is true. And there are other producers who show it just as well. But there are a couple, and I've tasted some wines where I'm like, why doesn't this express as much of the rocks? And someone told me that it is because if you try to modify your pH at all, because that would make your wine more stable, and you try and take the acidity up a notch, you ruin the whole way that the wine expresses. So people who are
there's producers who are modifying their acid levels.
They're using tartaric acid, which is the normal acid from a grape, and they're just adding a bit more so that they can stabilize their wine a bit better, which is a completely normal thing to do. But if you do that and you push it too much, apparently it just completely wipes out the whole that whole expression that you're getting. So it's really important that you don't. And Christoph, if you want to keep that, and Christoph doesn't do that, he wouldn't do that. That's not how he farms. He farms because he wants that expression of his place.
Yeah. And he's got horses. I mean, he's literally got a wine called Horsepower that like there's like draft horses that man these vineyards, and they have to be spaced wide enough to allow these horses to get through. They're huge horses. But it's a really cool place. And if if you're thinking about doing a trip to the Pacific Northwest, they're not, Walla Walla isn't necessarily like close to the Willamette Valley, but you can do it. Like there are ways to do it. And I definitely recommend, doing spending some time in Eastern Washington, whether that's in Walla Walla or in some of the other AVAs around there. There's, hills, there's Red Mountain AVA, there's some great AVAs around there, all on the eastern side. And you could never see Seattle. Like you could literally just you could just stay on the eastern side and then head down. The way that we did the cruise was really cool. So we flew into Spokane and then basically drove like an hour and change to Clarkston, Idaho, and basically departed out of there. I think starting in the Palouse, and then we ended up on either the Columbia or the Snake. I forget which was first. Maybe the Columbia, Mighty Columbia. And then kind of like made our way down and then ended in Portland so that if you wanted to get off the ship, you could then venture out into the Willamette Valley, which is only about a 45-minute drive from Portland, which is super cool because it's not like San Francisco where, the vineyards are a solid, hour to 90 minutes away, depending on the traffic. But
I'm like, it's also just much more manageable. Even if you fly into Portland and you go down to the Willamette and you're going to one of the further south wineries, you're not hitting San Francisco traffic. So it feels less stressful. You could also go the other way. You could fly into Portland. And what I would do living here is I go up and I go to Hood River so I can spend some time in the gorge because it's so beautiful. And then from there, I'll go over to Walla Walla. And I would highly recommend you stay in Walla Walla, not Tri-Cities. Walla Walla is much cooler.
Well, I've done both, and I definitely recommend Walla Walla. There's the hotel situation is what it is. It's not, there's like basically one hotel in the town. It's fine. It's very old. It's perfectly serviceable. But it is a really cute little town with like, great shops and restaurants, and we had some great ice cream. I'll put recommendations and stuff below if you want to spend a little time in Walla Walla. But we can't get off of this podcast without talking about the food of Portland. I'm so mad because I didn't think that we were going to have any time when we docked off this cruise, but we ended up having a few extra hours because flights got delayed. And so I had absolutely no time to like get my shit together to be in Portland for a great food journey. But where do you like to eat and drink in Portland? Because there are so many places.
I'm probably going to the Pacific Standard.
Okay.
For a cocktail. I think they have a great bar program.
Okay.
But I also wouldn't say no to going to Canard for a cocktail.
I would never say no to Canard.
That sounds pretty good. And then if you wanted a glass of Spanish wine, you could, they have an incredible wine list there, so you could get a glass of wine there. But if you wanted a little bit less noise, cozier spot, you could go around the corner to Bar Casa Valle and you could drink some sherry and some Spanish wine. You could
Are we eating at any of these places? I mean, obviously we're eating at Canard because there's nothing bad on that menu. I've literally never had a bad dish.
I wouldn't say no to eating at any of these places.
Okay.
I will say one of my favorite places to eat. I would say St. Jack's is incredible. Okay. Coquine, so good.
Okay. Have you been to Cannes?
I haven't. I think you asked me that like a while back, and I was like, no, I haven't been. Yeah. It is on my list.
It's so good. I can't even, I think about that meal far too often. And I feel like I eat at a lot of restaurants and I have a lot of great meals in a year. It's still I don't know. There was something about that place that just I think being in this industry, it's not often that we get surprised by textures and flavors and things that we ingest. And that was there was so many surprising things in that meal that I was that were also incredibly delicious that it still stands out as a top meal that I've had in the last 5 years. Right. I think it was my favorite of 2024.
Okay. Well, I'm definitely going to have to go to Cannes. I will, on the opposite side of that, there's a really comforting place. And I love how short their wine list is and how homey it is. It's called Lovely's 50/50 and they do incredible pizza. Okay. And it feels like home when you walk in there. And then there is another, I think that if you went to any of the Republica restaurants, you would be so happy. My friend Miguel does their wine list and he focuses on LGBTQ winemakers and Mexican wine. And he brings in a lot of he doesn't, but he works with people to bring in a lot of cool stuff.
That is very cool. Yeah. I can count on one hand how much Mexican wine I've had. And it's all been, I think, in Mexico because very little gets imported into California, weirdly. Yeah.
He did this pairing, and the man is a master of pairings. I've never met anyone who's better at it. It was a watermelon salsa chile with this Mexican rosé pet nat. Blew my mind.
That sounds so. What was the grape? Do you know? Do you remember?
I don't even remember.
There's a lot of varieties that they're growing there that I could not pronounce, nor would I remember. But what I've had is interesting and good.
Flavor profile wise, it was it tasted more like an Argentinian Criolla. It was light and fruity. Yeah, I go to Lilia if you come to Portland. That's the end of my whole food journey in my head is you have to go to Lilia.
Okay. Everything will be linked below. We'll have lists for you guys. But I think Portland is such an exciting food city. And the way that I think Philly is a very exciting food city. I think there's a lot of sort of synergy, for lack of a better term, between the two cities and a lot of the same vibes that you kind of feel. But obviously Portland's got the wine regions around it. And for that, they maybe get the award. What else is happening in the area that people should know about? Anything festival wise or event, if you were going to go to Portland or Eastern Washington to go wine tasting, is there a time that you should time it around? Is there a season?
I think that you would be happiest unless you love a good gray drizzle, which we have so many excellent coffee shops. There are a lot of roasteries. There are a lot of bookstores. There are a lot of independent theaters with really good beers and cheap tickets. So come in the winter. It's a great place in the winter. But I think if you would like it to be really beautiful out, then come in the summertime to Portland. Washington, I would say go in the spring or in the fall because it's not going to be so hot.
Although it will get hot in like Willamette Valley in like July. So
Yes.
and they're not necessarily equipped for it. So
no, that is true. We don't have air conditioning everywhere because the city was mostly built in a time where we didn't need it. My house is from 1912 and it has no AC and lots of things that are broken. Yeah.
But it's cool and it's quaint and it's 100 and some years old, which is awesome.
Yes, best month of the year here, I would say May, June, September.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, harvest is never a bad time to be in a wine region. It might be the most expensive and busy time, but it's also generally the most beautiful. So definitely recommend that. Anything else that we should be excited about in your world? Like what is new for you outside of being freshly off the 260 wine? What vintage of Napa Valley wines did you just taste for
2022 Cabs and 2023 Sauvignon Blanc? But I did taste a couple other things as well that people just poured for me.
Okay. And when will that get released?
Probably in the next month and a half.
Oh wow, that's fast.
I'm not gonna commit to anything because our editorial schedule is always moving.
Okay, but like in the next like this isn't like a 6 to 9 month ordeal normally.
No.
Okay,
we'll release much sooner than that. But a lot of the 2022s aren't released yet, so we're releasing ahead of that so people can go look at scores and how things showed, and then make their buying decisions when the wines hit the market. 2022 had a huge heat wave, and so people were kind of. I've heard winemakers who are like, oh man, it was just such a difficult vintage. And then they put that onto their wine. The wines themselves are really beautiful, actually. I was really impressed. I'd been hearing about how difficult it was. And I was like, yeah, but you guys did it. And you came out with a product that looks really good. So if you knew what you were doing, made some good wines in 2022, 2023. Obviously, it was a little bit cooler in California, and then it was warm up here for some reason. And the Sauvignon Blancs from 2023 were just they look really, really nice. In terms of things that are on the horizon, I'm going to say this out loud because then I have to do it.
Okay.
I'm planning to start releasing, once I'm through my coverage on Washington, Paso, and Napa, I will start releasing a tasting series. Like a blind tasting series. Okay. So that should be really fun. That will probably start in 2 months, I would say.
On Instagram or?
Both. Yeah, this will be, if it goes as planned, this will be like guides on our site and then short videos on Instagram.
That's so cool. I love that. I think we need more of that. If and when it happens, I will definitely be sure to make note of that on our Instagram. That's a great idea. But we've done an episode on blind tasting. And for those of you who haven't done it, it's one of these things that sounds very gimmicky, but it's actually incredibly helpful in learning about wine and sort of testing your knowledge and the practical application of such. And it's just a really fun thing to do. I think any chance you get to do a little blind, it can be very humbling but it's also one of those things that you need someone to guide you. You need someone to be like, this is very normal. This is not so normal. And here's what to look for. And this is why it's Syrah from the Rocks District in the Walla Walla.
And the normal process of doing that involves a tasting group who knows what they're doing. And it's true. A long time because people forget to tell you things like markers for Malbec and fuchsia rim and violets. And they just know it so much that they forget to tell you until you've been tasting together for a year. And you're like, oh, I get it now.
Yeah, that would have been helpful 3 months ago. Thanks a lot.
Exactly.
But I'll take it today. Yeah. It's funny. There is learning about wine, while it is a slow process, is often it's a non-linear one for a lot of reasons, but it's a non-linear one because there's just not a lot of like straight coursework for it. And to your point, especially for blind tasting, it's like we could use these videos. So I will be on the lookout for them. Things that you guys should be on the lookout for. The podcast Wine Club, if you're not a member, is still going. We got 4 wines for you guys every other month. This is the first wine and the newest shipment, so it's not too late to get in on this one. I will say this is a fantastic fantastic shipment I'm very excited about. Yes, as Sam is holding out the Tior Oregon Pinot Noir. There's 3 other wines in this shipment beyond that. One is from Bordeaux, the other is from California. We also have an Australian Riesling from Eden Valley, from one of the top producers in all of Australia, from Henschke, which is really, really cool. So I'm very excited about that. So if you guys are not members of that podcast wine club, you can find everything you need to join in the description below. Outside of that, I will also link the cruise that I went on in case you're curious about doing something like that. It was really fascinating to experience the surrounding regions outside of the primary wine growing regions. So like doing hikes and like I said, being on the water and like, feeling different microclimates around where we were and really experiencing the elements was so fascinating. And I think it's one of those things that when you're really paying attention to it, you start hearing people say like cool climate versus coastal versus elevation versus, what the sun exposure was. If you start paying attention to it as a human, you almost start to understand how it impacts a grape and how that can translate into a wine. So it was like one of the most holistically beneficial things that I've done both personally and professionally. So highly recommend. It was really fun. You should do something like that, Sam. I should get you connected with those guys. That would be a great thing for you to do. It's a lot of people in a small ship, but fun.
Hey, my editor just went on a cruise and she seems to have had a great time. So
it was shockingly fun. My sister and I had a blast. We met a lot of people. If anyone's listening from the ship, please feel free to drop us a comment. I love meeting everyone. We were definitely the younger of the crowd, but everybody was like there to have a great time and they were super adventurous. And that, obviously National Geographic certainly has like a connotation for the adventurous and the traveling into the parts unknown. So it was definitely an experience I won't forget. And I would be down to do it again. So,
if I was going to do one, I would do a National Geographic
totally
one. That sounds
well,
fun.
What's really cool is, outside of the wine expert that they bring on board, they have the Nat Geo experts on board with you. And so there's like 5 or 6 other people who are experts in differing fields. So they had like a bird expert, a geology expert, an engineering expert, because we were going through all the locks. So they were talking about the dams and how that affects, the salmon and like the actual construction of the dams. And so there was always these learning opportunities that felt really organic. And I just appreciated that because I didn't feel like it was in your face. It was just part of the experience. And I just left feeling, and it's a beautiful region, obviously. So to be on the rivers and seeing everything and making stops and jumping out of the Zodiac boats, it was really cool. I enjoyed it. Samantha, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
It was so lovely to be on.
Yeah, I will link everything and everywhere that you are below. And to all of you joining us, thank you so much. I hope you're enjoying the Pinot if you're drinking along with us. And cheers to you guys. Cheers to you, Sam.
Cheers.